Good evening again, 6th graders. Let's get on with our last lesson in weathering and erosion. In Chapter 2, we're covering pages 46 through 49. The first erosion that we're going to talk about is wave erosion. Of course, wave erosion is talking about the ocean or large bodies of water. And this ocean water, as it's coming up on the shore, causes great pressure to the rocks around it. It weathers the rocks because it has sediment inside of it, and it's causing abrasion against the rocks, making them smaller. And of course, it moves the sediment, erosion, and it drops it or deposits it in a new place. Now, places like the beach, the shoreline are always changing because of wave erosion. Water comes in with sediment, drops it, takes it out, takes sediment out to the ocean. The shore is always changing. Those rocks near the water are always changing because of wave erosion. It makes different formations like caves and rock formations like sea caves and sea stacks. We'll show you in just a moment. It also can produce islands and new land formations. Here in this picture, you'll see an example of two things. The first, the one that is closest to you, called the sea cave, which is in this area, this is what happens first. The waves constantly are coming up with sediment, causing abrasion, erosion, taking that sediment away, kind of digging a hole in the side of a mountain. Well, eventually up here at the top, you'll get what we call a sea arch, and that means that the erosion has gone all the way through, or the weathering has gone all the way through, and you can see on the other side. Well, finally, over time, you get what is called a sea stack. And a sea stack is a complete formation all by itself. It's no longer connected to the rest of the land. Sea stack. Okay. We also get things called sandbars. All right. In wave erosion, water is coming in with sediment and it's depositing it. And when that happens, sediment will build up, causing a sandbar. Now, in this case, it looks really pretty. This is a place for people to go on the beach and enjoy themselves. But there are times where sandbars can be very dangerous, especially for those large ships that are taking things to sell to other countries. And they're going through these things and going through the ocean and they don't see these sandbars, and it can be very dangerous for the ship. So they have to do what we call dredging, or removing that sand or sediment so ships can pass through and get to where they need to go. The next one is called wind erosion. Okay? Wind erosion most of the time happens in the desert. But it can also happen in places where there's a lot of drought. When you don't have water, plants can't grow. The roots do not hold the soil in the ground, so erosion can happen easily with wind. Okay, so we also have this word called deflation. Deflation just means that this area, because of erosion, is getting smaller. If you think of a balloon, when you put air in a balloon, it inflates, or you have inflation, or getting bigger. But deflation is when that air comes out of the balloon or gets smaller. So in erosion, deflation just means this land over here, because of erosion and sediment moving to a new place, this part got smaller. We also, because of wind erosion, this happens usually in the desert. Of course, we get what we call dust storms. Now, dust storms are the smaller pieces of sediment, like clay and silt, and it can get very, very tall, sometimes hundreds of meters high, and this is just loose sediment on the surface. If there's a lot of wind coming up, it can pick up that dust and cause a great cloud to move across the land. Then we also get what were sandstorms. Now, sand is heavier, so it's going to be lower to the ground, but it kind of pushes the wind pushes the sand along the ground, causing it to bounce. The sand, when you have wind erosion, you're obviously going to make the sand move or the sediment move. And it could cause things like big piles of sand called sand dunes. And we're going to see examples of each one of these things in the next slides. And remember, because of wind erosion, these sand dunes, these sand formations are constantly changing. These sand dunes can also get hundreds of meters high, or it can be very, very small. And because the wind is constantly changing them, these sand dunes can move up to 25 meters to a new place every year. This is some examples of a dust storm. You can see we have a GIF up here, or some motion, so you can see this large cloud of dust and, or what we call, we have clay and silt. I almost forgot the words. Just the wind is taking it and picking it up and making it a big cloud. This is a still picture to show you what it looks like. This is an example of a dust storm. It's much higher than a sandstorm, which is in the next picture. Sandstorms are used, oh, I apologize. Sandstorms are usually lower to the ground because the sand is heavier and the wind is kind of pushing it along the ground. And it makes these formations in the desert called sand dunes. And again, they change constantly and they can move up to 25 meters a year. The size and shape of a sand dune depends on how strong the wind is. Then we have what we call ice erosion. Now, ice erosion, you're going to be involving glaciers, and glaciers are just large pieces of ice moving down a mountain, and it's layers of ice and snow. The snow is melted, turned to ice, and the layer, and it gets really, really big and heavy. And because of the weight of that, gravity pulls that ice down the mountain. It's slow moving, but it is moving. Okay, so as it's moving down the hill or down the mountain, it's breaking away parts of the mountain. Okay, I apologize for that. All right, and those pieces of rock get stuck underneath the glacier, and it causes abrasion along the bedrock of that mountain. Okay, we have another thing called plucking. So as that glacier is moving, not only is it picking small pieces of rocks, it is so strong and that weight is so heavy and that pressure is so strong. As that glacier is moving over, it will grab large rocks and pull it out of the ground, large pieces of bedrock. It's kind of like pulling an apple off of a tree. We pluck an apple off of a tree. So when this glacier is moving, it's plucking large rocks and boulders out of the ground and dragging it across the bedrock. As it's moving, as this glacier is moving down the mountain, it carves kind of a U-shape. It makes a U-shaped valley. And when it melts, it makes what we call lakes. Okay? At the end of the glacier, when it gets down at the end of the mountain, of course, the temperature is warmer and that glacier melts. Well, at the end of this glacier, you'll have what we call a moraine, which is large piles of sediment, rock, and rock flour. Well, in the next slide, we'll see how that works. Okay, the last one, called rock flour. This is when the glacier is moving over various sizes of rocks and crushing them into a powder. It feels just like powder. It's called rock flour. This is an example of a glacier moving down the mountain. Okay, this is what the example we talked about with a moraine. Okay, so up here, this is a diagram of a glacier moving down a mountain, and here, this is pushing sediment, rock, dirt, soil down the mountain very slowly. And as it pushes it farther and farther and farther, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it gets down at the end of the mountain, the glacier melts, and it's left with these very, very large formations of sediment and rock called a moraine. Okay, this is an example of plucking. All right, so this glacier, this white part here, this is the glacier moving down the mountain. And if you can see here, these large pieces of rock, that glacier is moving over top of it and kind of, it's sticking inside the glacier, and that glacier picks it up and drags it down the mountain, causing abrasion on the mountain. And in the last slide, you can see these striations, okay, these kind of lines in the rock, and you can see how flat the rocks are, but those rocks that the glacier has picked up has scratched the surface of those rocks, making these lines or striations. Okay, wisdom class, just read the pages 46 to 49 and have some questions ready to talk about in class tomorrow. I'll see you then.